Hello, everyone. Welcome to Limping for Jesus. I'm your host, Pastor Mike Matthews. This is one of these bonus episodes that I told you guys about over the weekend. I am speaking with Charlie Cotherman. He is the Executive Director of the Center on Rural Ministry. And Charlie, that's out of Grove City College, right?
Yep. We're
Is
out of
that
Grove
Grove
City
City?
College.
Okay. So I first, Charlie is the pastor of Oil City Vineyard Church. I think him and his wife, you guys planted that church, right?
Yep, in
Okay.
2016.
2016. Okay. So he's a pastor, church planner, college professor. He had written several books. I first met Charlie when I was pastoring, in my first pastor, in 2016 at a small rural church, and I got involved with the Center on Rural Ministry. I think it was called the Project on Rural Ministry. It went through a name change, right?
Yep. We went from being a 5-year project to now a permanent center for rural ministry.
That's awesome. So I wanted to have Charlie to come on because we both minister in Western PA. We are in a rural context, and rural ministry is near to my heart because that's all I've ever pastored in. I thought, in my early 20s, I had this idea that I'd be a big city pastor doing hip hop ministry. I was like, Jesus, people in Miami need you too. But God has my context has always been rural ministry. So you've been with the project from the very beginning. You have had multiple roles, but the thing I wanted, how did this come about with the college and to focus on rural ministry this way?
Yeah. So around 2018, some folks in the college started really thinking, what does it mean for us to be a college that is in a rural area? Because Grove City is a small town, and the surrounding area is very rural. And they started asking these questions, which are great questions. And they started looking around, and they saw that there was a grant at Lilly that they thought, a thriving ministry grant, that they thought could actually help them take care of rural pastors. And so they started thinking about this grant, and they're like, well, we need a pastor on the team. And I'm a Grove City alum. Once I finished my PhD, I did what all recently minted PhDs do. They go to their alma mater and say, is there a job? And then they usually get told no, like I did. But about a year later, Grove City came back to me and they said, hey, we don't have this job, but we do have something that we think you could do maybe as a pastor advising this team or being part of this team. And so I was thrilled. I was able to continue pastoring the church my wife and I had planted, and I jumped on part-time with the Project on Rural Ministry team. And we started January 1, 2019. And we had 3 cohorts of pastors from basically southwestern New York, western PA, eastern Ohio, into northern West Virginia. And we've been trying to help pastors thrive and trying to connect college, church, and community since then. And as of January 1, we became the center for rural ministry, and we hope to have a long-term future here at Grove City, and that's Grove City's hope too.
And you have a new focus on the rural youth ministry, right? Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah. So as part of the new the new center, in our first phase, we only worked with senior or lead pastors. We only worked with churches in certain counties. And that was good for that phase. But in the new phase, we said we want more flexibility because we knew there was a lot of need for resourcing and encouraging in rural youth leaders. I'm talking everyone from paid full-time youth pastors to part-time youth pastors to volunteer youth pastors and youth leaders. And we just wanted to come around them. So when we thought, what affinity groups, because we're going from cohorts to affinity groups, kind of organized around affinities. When we thought about what affinity groups were needed, one of the first ones that popped up for us was youth leaders affinity group for people that cared about student ministry. And we have on faculty here, Duffy Robbins, who has a history of mentoring youth pastors and helping youth pastors thrive and grow. And we thought this makes perfect sense. So starting next week, January 30th, Tuesday night, 6:30 to 9 at Grove City College, Duffy will be leading our first affinity group for youth leaders. And I'm excited. There's still room for people to join, and there's still time. So we could definitely add to the group.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know. For when I was pastoring in a rural setting, I was doing the youth ministry too, and it is a hard thing to do, rural ministry, because the pastor wears all the hats.
Yes.
So when you guys were flushing out the center for a rural ministry, you talk about resourcing. Was that a big issue with pastors, like how to balance their time? And
Absolutely. And wearing all these hats. So for instance, in this youth leaders group, we have about 10 signed up right now. And I know I'm trying to go through a list in my mind. One for sure is a lead pastor, but he's also the youth pastor. He's doing the youth ministry. And then I absolutely know that we have at least 2 or 3 who are completely volunteer, lay people that just care about kids. And so we have everything from like the senior pastor down to volunteers and everything in between with part-time paid staff. And we're just trying to help because we know that pastoral thriving, which is one of the things we're all about, isn't something that can happen in a vacuum, and it can't happen alone. It takes relationship. It takes having lay people come in and help with certain tasks. It takes a good board. It takes support, and so we're trying now in this new phase to help pastors. But one of the ways we're trying to help pastors is by building up the support around them.
Yeah. So when they go to these affinity groups, is there training going on? Is there like what is that group going to look like?
Yeah, so it's going to look different. So for instance, later in April, we're going to start an affinity group down in your neck of the woods in Waynesburg. Bill Sokolsky, who was a longtime pastor down there, retired, is going to lead that group.
Okay, I saw that. I saw that.
Yeah, and we're really excited about that. But that group's going to look different than the youth leaders group because Bill has some things he really feels on strongly in his heart about helping pastors thrive on every level, and he's going to work through a program that he's developing from his years of ministry experience. Duffy's going to work through a different kind of program. So I imagine there'll be material that Duffy shares. We're going to work through a few books on youth ministry in the youth ministry cohort. I'll be meeting between our quarterly sessions. I will meet in regional, like with either small groups of these pastors closer to home over coffee and just talk through the material. And so there's going to be learning. There's going to be sharing stories, best practice, and like sharing stories from the trenches, I'm sure, and encouragement and prayer. And honestly, we hope that these are kingdom groups, that there is like real kingdom work that comes out of these and encouragement for the task.
Yeah, that's good. So with the Center on Rural Ministry and with your work you guys are doing with your own church, Oil City, like what is your hope for rural ministry?
Yeah, that's a great question. So maybe if I tell a little bit of our story and how we got to Oil City, it would kind of help add a little color to this.
That would be good. Yeah.
So I grew up in a small town, a town of 1,100, Knox, Pennsylvania. My wife's from the same town. And, we went to seminary together around 2010. And the seminary was doing some great stuff in church planting. And I mean, for the early 2000s, almost all my heroes were like church planters. They were the ones writing the books and doing the stuff. And I was like, that's amazing. But my thing was I could never get involved with church planting because I could not shake this heart for the places where I grew up. And no matter, I tried, but I just couldn't shake it, And I realized that the people that like peopled my memories as a kid were not the people that most church planting organizations were trying to reach. They thought they were already reached, or they didn't really care. There wasn't a big enough critical mass. And so, like that was one of those things that kind of became for me like a holy discontent. Like it rubbed me wrong, but I didn't know what to do about it. And so I kept following, the next faithful step for me. And it was to go get a PhD. I felt God leading me there. And I thought I'll be a professor first, pastor second, kind of let the rural thing in the background. But we're down in, Charlottesville's not a big town, but it's a very affluent college town of like 40, 50,000. And it's like an hour and a half from DC. So it feels a lot more cosmopolitan. And we're there in this affluent town. It's a great place to raise kids and stuff. But at the same time, like, I just felt this discontent growing. And I was just thinking, like, I know God has my home area, you know, rural, post-industrial, Rust Belt, Western PA. I can't shake it. And so after about 2 years of praying, we moved back, started church in a living room with 8, and God's been in it. But the same thing that motivated that still motivates me, and it's to remind the world that small places, small churches, forgotten people matter. And honestly, that motivates my work at the Center for Rural Ministry. It motivates my pastoring in Oil City, because there are places in this country where people think we don't matter, or where we can't do things that matter. And that's not true at all. I mean, look at the gospel. That's absolutely not true. And so I think part of the way I think about my ministry is just to try to remind everyone everywhere, especially the small places.
The one thing that I in my contacts when I was pastoring is the pastors. We had like a local ministerium, and we really saw each other as one church, just multiple locations, and that's how we tackled those issues. And like, we didn't have a budget to do VBS, for example, Vacation Bible School, for you guys that don't know the acronym, but so we would put our money together to do a VBS for the whole town.
Absolutely.
And there was only like 700, 800 people in our area. But the idea of, like, you know, backwater, you're forgotten about, like, those people need the gospel too.
Absolutely.
And they need that. So that gave you the passion to, are you guys part of the Vineyard denomination that was back in the day?
Yep, okay. That's right. Vineyard USA. There's like 3 or 4 Vineyard USA churches in all of Western PA, from Altoona to the state line, and we're one of them.
Okay, and is there one in Wheeling too? Wheeling, West Virginia? Yeah,
Wheeling has the biggest one in the region.
Okay, and then there's I think there's one up in Newcastle, Newcastle, PA. I think there's one.
Yeah, I'm not aware of one there at the moment, but there might have been. There's been a few tries.
I'm thinking of Victory.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's been a few tries over the last couple of decades, but they haven't all been able to stay.
Yeah, like I remember when I first got involved with the project, I really liked. We talked. One of our breakout sessions was talking about Tim Keller's book, where Tim Keller was like, and right or wrong, it's not, I don't agree, disagree, but he was talking about city out. And we were saying that's good, but also don't forget about the small towns too.
That's right.
So can you speak on like how the project kind of said, like, if I remember correctly, like small town areas and churches can impact culture for Christ?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, what Tim Keller did in City Church and stuff is great. And the cities need the gospel. We need churches planted there. Absolutely. But sometimes people heard only the cities, right? That's not what Keller was saying, but that's kind of what people heard sometimes. And so, you know, there was this push for you know, hitting the big cities and planting churches there. And then around the same time, you had this kind of like faithful presence idea from James Davison Hunter, where it was kind of like top-down cultural change is the way all cultural change works. And so there was a lot of this, if we want to change the culture, if we want to do this, we got to go to the big places and we got to get these high-status jobs. And of course, there's truth in all that. That is important to think about. And I pray that there are always Christians in those places doing that work, right?
Yeah.
But the thing we also have to remember is that we follow a carpenter from a town that had a bad reputation in the region, a town of like 400 people, you know, that people said no one's going to succeed from there, right?
Yeah.
And who spent most of his ministry in the backcountry and still changed the world. And then you start looking at like the church in Rome. I'm preaching through Romans right now. The church in Rome, you know, like no one knows who founded that church. The idea that Peter founded it came pretty late. No one really knows. When Paul writes, he doesn't write to a specific founder. He doesn't name it. Paul didn't found it. It was probably someone who happened to be in Pentecost today, maybe an ex-slave, maybe a little unnamed person for sure, right?
Yes.
So the gospel spreads like this. And so the real question is not what's more strategic, but what has God called me to? Yes. Where has he put me? If I just happen to be born in a rural community, but that seems like happenstance to me, but not to God. He put me there for a reason.
I think I think church culture and with young pastors and that they see like the steam vertex, they see the they see the churches with the bells and the whistles. Like there's like this idea of in social media and TikTok, like there's this like fame subculture of Christian fame that is appealing. Like I remember when I was coming up, it was the Gospel Coalition. Like you had Matt Chandler, you had John Piper, Mark Driscoll. Like you had those like they had those booming churches with multiple campuses. And I'm not saying that's the wrong way to do ministry, but people tend to be like, well, if I'm not there, I'm not succeeding. And it's like it's about calling. Like I used to tell my church, we had like before COVID, we maybe had 60 regulars, but I told him like the next great missionary, the next great pastor could be in these pews. And that's why at one point our youth group was bigger than our church. So and I was like, this is why we do this ministry, because the next great Christian writer, pastor, like you guys, I used to say all the time, you guys matter to Jesus too. And throughout the Gospels, throughout the New Testament, you see that God uses the unlikely candidate. Absolutely. Like I think about Paul all the time. Like he is the most unlikely church planner ever. How his story started persecuting Christians and people of the way. Like the unlikely candidate is, I mean, look at how Jesus was born and how people, Mary and the scandal around the virgin birth and who are you? You're just a carpenter's son. Like that whole dig on, like that was a dig on who Jesus was and where he came from. Yeah. So I just think rural ministry is vital to the gospel.
Yeah, that's right. And like what you said, about the models we're looking to. Well, here's the thing. I like to point this out that like what you see as the successful model can impact your ability to hear God well. Because you can think that surely couldn't be God's voice calling me back home to my small town, because surely God wants me to be successful and reach more people in ministry like these people. And so our models, the models we're holding up, like even the idea of fame you talked about, that is not an idea we get from scripture. That is an idea that the church gets from culture. We're a fame obsessed culture right now. And the church, rather than being, salt and light, has just taken that on, and fame and celebrity have come to be the seeming marks of godliness until half of our celebrities fall on their faces. Yeah. Right. But rather, we should be asking people to truly listen. If God has called you to be on a big platform, great, follow that call. But we need people that can hear the call. Go home, or go to this small town. Yeah. Go to this obscure place, because God's there and he wants you there with him.
Yeah. I mean, I know for my personal ministry, like how God did amazing things. Like I was the only pastor like me in a small town. I had cerebral palsy. People would come up to me at the post office and be like, you changed my way, the way I look at pastors, at Christians, at what people with disabilities can do. Like there's moments when it never happened if I didn't obey God's call. Amen. Like, I felt called to go to this small, someone asked me years ago, like, Pastor Mike, you're a gifted pastor and all this. why are you wasting your time in that small town? And I was like, I'm
Mhm.
not wasting my time. I'm right
Sure.
where Jesus wants me to be. And
Yes.
that's what younger pastors need to hear. And
Hmm.
hopefully they get it from our talk here, is go where you're called,
Yes.
because, I saw that model of fame back during the Catalyst conferences, like
Uh-huh.
back in the day where back in like the mid 2000s where Rob Bell was still like a rock star in Christianity, and you see like I saw younger people just say, "Oh, I like say all kind of crazy things like I just want to be like X, Y, and Z pastor," and I'm like,
Yes.
it's like that subculture of like, yeah, it's cool what they did for Christianity. It's cool their books are selling and people are reading their books and they're preaching to 40,000 people, but you preaching to 10, 15 people is just as important in the gospel.
Hmm. That's right. That's right.
So so I do you have any closing thoughts about our talk about anything that we talked about? I know
Yeah.
our time was short today, but I feel like this was an important
Yeah.
conversation to have.
Yeah. Well, thanks first of all for making time for me. I really appreciate you hosting me on the program. And just to sum up a couple of things, if you are in rural ministry out there, or you are in small town ministry, or you feel forgotten and obscure, I just want you to know, like Mike has said, that you are not by God, and what you're doing matters.
Mm,
And I just want to encourage you with that. Keep on keeping on. Be faithful. Keep showing up. That is so much of the Christian life and so much of ministry. The days that you don't want to show up, keep showing up.
mm.
And, as far as the Center for Rural Ministry goes, we'd love to work with you. We'd love to get to know you. We're trying to get to know more pastors in this region. And I think some of our affinity groups can be helpful. We're trying to get students into small churches, places they might not find their way to unless we kind of help that relationship grow. And God's doing some really cool stuff. So I'm excited about the future, but we have so much more to learn. And I think the pastors that listen to this podcast could be part of how we learn what God's doing in the next phase and how we discern together what God's doing in our region.
That's awesome, Charlie. Thank you again for coming on the show, and I really hope this episode will encourage rural ministries, and hopefully I'll put information in the show notes
Thank
about
you.
the dates and that the affinity group. But I just want to thank you for giving us some of your time to come on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. And you can find out more at www.ruralministry.org.
All right, thank you, man.
All right. Thanks, Pastor Mike.
God bless you and all your ministry and all you're trying to do for the kingdom.
All right. Thank
Okay.
you. You too. God
All
bless.
right. Bye.